There is this belief that when you cut rates, you can do so in a way that isn't going to reignite animal spirits. How much of a rate cut? You see only 25 basis points of a rate cut as reigniting a lot of interest in the housing market. So how does that factor into pricing and this idea that we can get a soft landing with rate cuts given the backdrop that we have right now?
Well, I think that outsized response to the 25 basis point cut or a modest cut of some sort, you have to think of the last 2.5 years have been this era of pent-up demand that suddenly the sort of legs were cut out from under the housing market, and people that were in the process of thinking about it were stopped in their tracks, and everybody's waiting. And the problem with the waiting part is that when you have if you have a rate cut and this surge of an activity, I think you're going to see prices rise again. The only way for more supply, that's been one of the reasons why we've had such price growth, is inventory's been very lacking. We are seeing inventory come in, but we haven't seen the same amount of demand respond to it because of rates. So when you see rates cut, you're going to see a surge, at least in the short run, you're going to see a surge in demand. And that's going to keep prices elevated, which has sort of broken all the rules of economics, where we're talking about record prices and mortgage rates are more than double where they were.
There was a theory out there that when the Fed cuts rates, that's actually going to cause more volume to come onto the market. So you'll actually see more houses go out there, which will actually cause prices to fall, because you'll actually get price discovery in a way that we haven't had for 4 years. Why don't you believe that?
So let's take a market like Miami, and there's been lots of discussion about inventories coming in. Over the last year, inventory has risen about 38%. So you'd think, wow, prices are, going to be challenged. But that inventory result of after that increase is still 25% below pre-pandemic. So when you look at the percentage of inventory growth, and we are seeing it, and it is good for consumers in the long run, but it's not enough yet. That there was such an incredible deficit of supply that sort of, 100% or whatever the local market number, a big, sort of headline grabbing increase in inventory is still coming from a record low. And it's not even, I won't say it's not even close, but it's still well below long-term norms. And that's the dilemma. It's sort of, everybody's waiting for rates to become more affordable. But in the meantime, I think we're going to see price growth. And so someone waiting for a lower rate, another 50 basis or even more, they're going to be disappointed, because I think 2 or 3 years from now, prices are going to be higher than they are now, even with more supply coming into the market. For example, in a lot of suburbs that we track, bidding wars, especially in the New York metro area, are 40 to 50% of the closings. So what does that tell you about supply? It tells you that it's extremely low. It's not the same in every market. Some markets have more supply than others, but it is still a challenge in housing right now, is supply. And the Fed, if you look at what happened this spring, this is a very underwhelming spring market.
Right.
I think consumers were expecting, this is, rates are going to come down and we're going to see this sonic boom of demand. But rates until the last few weeks have really been sort of stuck at an elevated level. And you're not going to see a lot of, you didn't see the surge that everybody was expecting this spring. And now the consumers are, I don't know if anybody's taking the forecast seriously, because it's like we just keep setting the rate cut date 2 or 3 months from now.
Well, if you are one of these people who had been hoping for that 25 basis point cut to be the thing that ignites things, and not just ignites things, but to Lisa's point, makes housing prices going down, asking for a friend, when does that moment come? How long will it take for enough supply to come online that actually you see some relief?
I think it's 3 or more years. I think it's not a couple of quarters. I think it's a long process, because rates were too low for too long during the pandemic, and literally existing inventory was wiped clean off the off the earth, basically, and we're coming from a very low point, and that's a challenge. And in fact, in this period, new development or new construction, which is only 10% of supply, is where we could see faster supply coming into the market. But that's only 10% of the market. The other 90% is based on organic growth, and it's starting from a very low point, and that's the challenge.
Can we talk about the rental market in New York? Manhattan prices are actually decreasing. Why?
Yes, actually, Manhattan. So the way to think of pricing in Manhattan on the rental market is it's almost like a choppy. I don't know if you call it a bottom, but it's this. 1 month it's up, 1 month it's down. It's been like this for about 6 or 7 months, but still remaining at very elevated levels. In fact, rents right now are about 20% higher than before the pandemic.
So I guess that when you put all this together, this is actually kind of a counter to what the Fed is saying. They're saying that actually when they cut rates, they're going to be just adjusting things and that inflation will continue to go down and that rents are just a lagging indicator and that they're coming down much faster. From what you're saying, it sounds like that's not the case, and that when they cut rates, they're going to reignite some of the price increases that have kept inflation where it is, given where rents fall in terms of weighting in the inflation metric. Is that true? Is that kind of how you see things?
So that's how I see it. But the sort of the bigger question mark for me is that sort of initial burst in activity of a modest rate cut. How long does that surge or that pent-up demand last? Is this a 6-month phenomenon? Is this a long-term phenomenon? That's the question in my mind. How long will this hold up?